Hey internets. Now, unless you've been living underneath a rock, you've probably heard the news, which is that Charlie Kirk has been assassinated. And if you don't know who that is, a TLDR is that he's essentially just a very famous conservative activist and influencer. Generally pro-Trump, anti-leftist, generally somewhat pro-free market, although not as pro-free market as I would have liked him to be. He generally promoted traditionalist Christian values, while being pretty outspoken against things like wokeness or cancel culture, and to some degree the equity fallacy. Personally, I agreed with him on some things and didn't agree with him on other things. However, one thing I strongly disagree with is this ridiculous, insane idea that it's okay to murder someone just because they don't agree with you. And you see, that's what makes this a uniquely more evil crime than usual. Because aside from being the founder of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk wasn't a politician. He was a political activist, and much of what he did probably at least aided a little bit towards Donald Trump getting reelected. But he had no real political power on his own. And that's an issue because I don't agree with any kind of assassination, but when it comes to politicians, it is at least possible for a politician who holds real power to do something evil that negatively affects someone in a very aggressive and very significant way. So it's possible, although still wrong, emphasis that this is still wrong, for a politician to be murdered for something they actually did. But in the case of this assassination, it seems very strongly that Charlie Kirk was murdered simply for saying things that the guy who killed him didn't agree with. So it was a very uniquely disgusting crime, and also quite rare. Prominent, famous activists like this don't actually get assassinated very often. Again, because it's kind of a uniquely evil and psychotic crime that can only really be committed by a very evil and psychotic person. In fact, from what I can tell, the last time that a political activist in the United States was assassinated this way was Martin Luther King Jr. It's been a very, very long time since we've seen something like this, which is probably why it's all over the news and all over social media. And this, of course, unfortunately results in a lot of people on the internet being very, very wrong and giving very insanely bad takes, with the old and dying breadtube crowd chiming in to provide us with their almost comically wrong opinions. And so that's what this video is going to be about. This isn't a video for a eulogy, plenty of other people have given that. Instead, this is just purely for your intellectual entertainment as I refute the stupid. But first off, this video does not have a sponsor, nor am I going to be selling anything. Instead, for this one, I think it's far more appropriate to point out that you can in fact donate to Charlie Kirk's family in order to help them out during these hard times. Because there's a lot of testimonies from people out there showing that Charlie Kirk was a genuinely decent person. Even if you didn't agree with him on some kind of political thing that he said, he always gave people a sense of genuine respect. And he was a pretty strong proponent of free speech. Again, just emphasizing how evil it was to assassinate him like this. And so a link to that will be in the description below. But anyways, let's start out with the first bad take, which is people saying that this only happened because we didn't have gun control. Or people claiming that Charlie Kirk somehow deserved to get shot because he didn't support gun control. Or that it's not a political violence problem, but a gun violence problem. Lots of people have said this one, and it's pretty sad and insane because it's a point that has been refuted 1,000 times. Every single study that I have seen that tries to claim that guns lead to more murders and increase in crime and whatnot, well, they all commit the statistical dishonesty of only counting gun deaths and gun murders while ignoring other causes. Which of course is extremely stupid reasoning, because obviously a murderer is going to use the best weapon available for their murder. In the case of access to guns, it's probably going to be a gun. However, when you take the guns away, well, that doesn't reduce the crime rate or the murder rate, really. In fact, most studies that look at this honestly either show a neutral non-impact to gun access and crime statistics, or they actually show a positive relation where free access to guns actually reduces the overall crime rate. Which, of course, on a rational sense makes perfect sense. If you are a robber and you have a choice between going to two different cities, and City A allows its residents to have guns in their houses, and City B does not allow their residents to have guns in their houses, well, which city are you gonna go to and rob? This is a tough one. Gonna really have to put our thinking caps on to figure out this one. I mean, it's just such an insanely stupid argument to make. And of course, it wouldn't stop assassinations. In history, we see plenty of assassinations have taken place back in the days without guns. They were done by a knife to the throat from the shadows from some professional assassin, or they were done with poison. Just basic historical evidence shows that it's a human problem rather than a gun problem. Honestly, these arguments almost seem to imply that they actually believe that humans lived in perfect peace and harmony until guns were invented, and then all of a sudden assassinations came into existence. It's just no. Obviously no, that's just not historically accurate at all, nor does it reflect a serious understanding of human psychology. I've done an entire video on on this subject. I again consider it a point that has been refuted 1,000 times. If guns didn't exist, then the assassin could have just simply slipped some kind of deadly poison into Charlie Kirk's water bottle or something. Getting rid of the guns does not magically get rid of the concept of assassination. It's actually just mind-boggling that people unironically think this way. And then, of course, for the insane claim that he deserved it because he didn't support gun control, well, that's just a very blatant false equivalence fallacy. I've seen this so many times, people not understanding the entire point of the right to bear arms. The right to self-defense is not the same thing as the right to murder people. This is a critical misunderstanding of property rights that I see coming from far leftists all the time. Property rights, in terms of the right to your own body and the right to your own life, doesn't necessarily mean you're against violence, period, but rather it's being against aggression, which is not exactly the same thing. An aggressor is the person who causes the conflict, the person who initiates the violence. And so a recognition of property rights must necessarily mean a recognition of your ability and right to defend your life and body against an aggressor, which means that when someone becomes a violent aggressor in such a way that they are causing a conflict with somebody else's life, aka being a psychotic murderer going after somebody, well then that means that as an aggressor, they are forfeiting that part of their rights because they have aggressed on somebody else's life. That's the difference between murder and self-defense in terms of ethics and philosophy. And so people who equate the two as being the same thing, well, that's just an example of philosophical illiteracy. And if we're being honest, very few people actually sincerely believe this. If you were to suddenly find yourself in a large room and Johnny the psychotic murderer is coming after you with a chainsaw and you're given a button to press that will instantly vaporize him, let's be honest, most people are going to press that button. And you would be in the right to do so. That's why murder and right to your own life is in regards to aggression and people causing conflicts. So there's a very big difference between violence to prevent a crime and violence to cause a crime. And pretending that there is no difference is honestly kind of insane. I mean, just push that to its logical conclusions and imagine the type of society that we would create if we were to pretend that there's no difference. It would effectively mean that nobody actually really owns anything. If you do not have the right to defend your property, then you effectively don't really have the right to any kind of property at all. And therefore it is the people who deny the right to self-defense who are guilty of logical self-contradiction, not the people who are in favor of self-defense. Another argument that is somewhat related to the gun rights argument, but different enough to call it out individually, is this really weird take from Hassan Abbey that has been mirrored by a lot of people and of course reposted by Bush, which is that this is actually just another school shooting, rating America as an insanely violent nation. Charlie Kirk shooting is the 46th school shooting this year thus far. And sadly, this is just another example of midwits being pedantically correct. Pedantry is just the hallmark of the pseudo-intellectual. They think that if they can say something that is correct on some superficial but technically correct level, or that if they can just get a hit in, then they are somehow correct on everything else they say. And in this case, it's not even really technically true. I mean, yes, it did technically happen on school grounds, but it was during an event. And also, most people regard a school shooting as just a random attack when a shooter goes onto campus and just fires indiscriminately, usually killing and wounding multiple people. Whereas when it's specifically targeting one single prominent figure, we generally call that an assassination. I mean, you could, on a very, very pedantic level, call it a school shooting, but that completely misses the point. It doesn't understand the difference in the problem. If you look at the increase of school shootings over time, it reveals itself to be more of an issue with public trust and culture and demographics. Things like that, because school shootings didn't used to be common, despite access to guns that are capable of carrying out a school shooting for a very long time, at least in the United States of America. And assassinations, of course, have a completely different incentive behind them. There's a very different mindset from someone wanting to murder someone for political reasons or philosophical reasons or some kind of disagreement, versus someone who's just angry at society and wants to murder people indiscriminately because they've become a psychopath. A completely different thought process behind it. And so this take is really just nothing more than kind of a midwit deflection, trying to avoid admitting the real problem behind what's actually happened here, which I'll go into a bit more at the end of this video. Anyway, let's move on from gun rights to this insane take from Destiny. I'll just roll a quick clip of it.
What do you think conservative response to this will be? It's going to be the exact same response that it always is. It's going to be blaming the left. It's going to be a call for more aggressive rhetoric towards the left. It's going to be a call for the left to condemn or disavow whatever the anybody on the left that does any sort of disavow whatever bullshit I think is cucked and weak. I saw Newsom doing it earlier. Alright, so for context here, let's just see what Gavin Newsom actually had to say.
His post on X reads, "We should all feel a deep sense of grief and outrage at the terrible violence that took place in Utah today. Charlie Kirk's murder is sick and reprehensible, and our thoughts are with his family, children, and loved ones." Etc., etc. Ideas are tested through words and good faith debate, never through violence. Honest disagreement makes us stronger. Violence only drives us further apart and corrodes the values at the heart of this nation. Now, of course, there's some evidence that Gavin Newsom has not exactly been consistent on this, and has actually called for violence against conservatives in the past, so it's hard to really hand him a win on this, but at least in the context of this specific individual tweet, let's just say that it is a rare occurrence of Gavin Newsom being somewhat reasonable. This is not cucked and weak at all. If anything, what is cucked and weak is being so emotionally immature that you think murdering someone for simply disagreeing with you is an okay and completely rational response to it. This whole "but what about when the other side does it" completely misses the point. The point is about denouncing it from both sides, which, when you have a consistent meta-ethical epistemology, is very easy to do. I actually called this out earlier from Destiny on the day that this happened in another post. He wrote, "This is what's going to happen. The same thing that always happens. Republicans are going to spin conspiracies, blame the left, and force them to disavow political violence." Really? Disavow political violence? Forcing someone to disavow political violence as if that's some kind of difficult thing to do. This has to be one of the most insane things that Destiny has ever said. It's really kind of been sad watching Destiny's fall from a somewhat reasonable, moderate liberal lefty to just another clueless bread tuber spewing violent rhetoric. I'll just repeat what I wrote in response to this nonsense. It's really easy for any functioning adult with a rational worldview to disavow political violence from both sides. All you have to do is have just, again, a consistent understanding of property rights and ethics. To understand that murdering someone for their views is wrong no matter which view it's coming from or which side of the political spectrum. Watch as I do so. I disavow political violence on all sides. See how I did that? See how easy it is to disavow political violence on all sides when you aren't a psychopath? Really easy, actually. Amazingly simple. I don't feel any guilt or shame or feel like I'm contradicting myself when I say that because I have a consistent worldview on this, unlike Destiny. And it's kind of sad, really, to be proven right like this, because I kind of called this out a while ago in a video I did on this kind of engagement baiting to stochastic terrorist pipeline that a lot of the breadtoids have found them in. BreadTube is just kind of so desperate to remain relevant that they get really hooked on engagement baiting and saying insanely stupid things in order to just get people riled up. And they don't seem to understand that this ultimately makes them a stochastic terrorist. And also, for consistency's sake, I do have to refute this coming from the right a bit too. I've seen a lot of conservatives also saying that because of this murder of Charlie Kirk, then everybody who's right-leaning must acknowledge that we are now in a civil war and we should start murdering lefties. No, 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 no. A single assassination does not mean we have to escalate to civil war. Admittedly, this event has shown how a lot of people on the far left are completely deranged, but that's just on the internet. You have to remember that the internet has an unfortunate tendency to turn normal people into complete idiots. And so people often say deranged things that they don't actually have any kind of plans on acting on. It's just using the moniker of anonymous to emotionally vent. Now, you could make a reasonable case for national divorce at this point, but I think calling for civil war is severely jumping the gun. And it's also just part of a little bit of collectivist brain rot. Just because someone murdered Charlie Kirk for what he believes doesn't mean that you have the right to murder somebody else for what they believe. And while I definitely can see how Kirk's assassination could be a turning point in politics from now on, no pun intended there, I think a lot of people are jumping the gun. I think the correct take here is to let the far-left neo-Marxists expose themselves so that the moderates can see them for the psychopaths that they truly are. That, I believe, is a better strategy at this stage in the game. Anyways, the next thing to refute is that the shooter was actually an Odysee, and so this murder of Charlie Kirk therefore actually is right-wing violence, etc., etc. Now, first of all, that actually wouldn't even matter even if it was true. Whether it's some psychotic Marxist who shot him, or some psychotic Wignot who shot him, in both cases, it's just an insane person killing someone for something that they said. It's still wrong. Again, when you have a consistent worldview on this, it's not hard to say that it's still wrong no matter what. And it doesn't matter because what we've seen is so many people on the far left making deranged statements in favor of this assassination. There was this post from Grums I saw that I believe put it the best. The left doesn't understand. The shooter's motives don't even matter that much anymore. What matters is that we all saw their masks drop and reveal them for the evil murder party that they are. That is unfortunately kind of the issue here. Even if the shooter turns out to be some far-right neo-Nazi psychotic wignot, or some kind of accelerationist or something, well, at this point it's kind of inconsequential. It doesn't really matter. The issue is that the way people are responding to this event is completely deranged. Some of my viewers gave me entire collages of just screenshots of nutty neo-Marxists saying deranged things. Like J.K. Rowling next, or Ben Shapiro next, or Trump next. The issue here isn't just the fact that Charlie Kirk was assassinated and that that's wrong. The issue is that too many people don't understand why that is wrong. I mean, there's just so much derangement on the internet I'm seeing here that I'm seeing just totally random weird stuff. Like this one right here, the saltier than kraut subreddit getting angry because someone prayed for Charlie Kirk. I mean, what kind of nut jobs get upset at things like this? Imagine getting angry because someone prayed for the well-being of another person. I mean, regardless of whether or not you believe in prayer or believe in God, it doesn't matter. It's such a just totally bizarre thing to get upset by. Normal, rational, functioning adults do not get upset by this kind of thing. But anyway, second of all, as I'm recording this, the evidence that he was a Nazi appears to be very, very low. Rather, the evidence seemed to suggest that the shooter was raised in a conservative family and was later radicalized into neo-Marxist politics, which, is kind of typical for Utah. It's a fairly conservative, strong Republican area, and so a kid might find themselves being raised in a Mormon family or something like that, and then later as they enter the public school system of high school and some college, and then they might find themselves getting indoctrinated into something completely different, in this case being radical neo-Marxist thinking. And the evidence seems to suggest this, at least from what we currently know. Again, this is a relatively current new event. We don't even know for absolute certainty that this really was the shooter, honestly. It's strongly suspected, and probably is the shooter, and for the sake of argument, we'll say it is the shooter, but again, evidence is still coming in. So again, as of recording this, it appears that the shooter is Tyler Robinson, age 22, resident of Utah, raised in a conservative family, and it seems he was taught how to use guns from a fairly early age as a result of this. However, it was found on the gun that was used various writings that suggest that his ideology no longer really comes in touch or aligns with what his family taught him. Things like, "Hey fascist, catch," seemingly suggesting that they believe that Charlie Kirk is a fascist, which would go in line with neo-Marxist rhetoric that everybody who supports capitalism in any shape or form is automatically a fascist, which they then use as a form of stochastic terrorism to suggest that anybody who isn't a Marxist deserves to be shot at like this, which is kind of the go-to tactic of far-lefty violent rhetoric. They do it in two stages, and equivocate on what is meant by a fascist. First off, they'll point to all the evil things that the Nazis did back in their day, but then they'll falsely equate that to completely general conservative ideas or any kind of right-leaning idea at all, while claiming that it's personally reasonable to be violent against them as self-defense against what the Nazis did, but then they're equating that to just random conservatives who have completely different views than what the Nazis had. So in other words, they'll try and say that, oh, it's perfectly reasonable to be intolerant of Nazis, but then the far-left neo-Marxists will falsely accuse everyone they don't like of being Nazis. That's the basic way that they get away with their stochastic terrorism. They first make it sound reasonable by pretending like they're just talking about what Hitler did, but they're actually trying to tie that to anybody who's to the right of Obama. It's a very dishonest Mott and Bailey dance that they pull. And that's exactly what we found on this guy's gun that he used to murder Charlie Kirk. And it also included references to transgender ideology and civil rights and whatnot, along with an Italian Antifa song. So it seems like the most likely explanation here is that Tyler Robinson was radicalized into Antifa thinking ideology, which again is just a front for Marxist ideology. They're not actually anti-fascist, they're just foot soldiers for the authoritarian communist regime that they wish to create. With the ones that actually truly do believe that what they're doing is being anti-fascist, well, those are just useful idiots, really. They're just philosophically illiterate and don't understand their own ideology because they don't understand where it's coming from or where it's going. And indeed, there does seem to be some new evidence coming out that this guy was active in some Antifa Discord servers and was an active member of Antifa. This is just secondhand information. It's just information coming out as I'm recording this. It may or may not be true, but from the sources it's coming from, like Timcast, for example, they're usually correct, so it's probably true. Especially since the evidence to the contrary seems to be very bizarre and very reaching. the typical copes that people make when they don't want to admit that they're wrong. Like this one from SDL, for example. Look, he dressed up as Donald Trump for Halloween in 2017. Therefore, the shooter is actually a Republican. Oh boy. Alright, there's so many things that are wrong with this argument. First off, someone dressing up as something for Halloween doesn't actually prove anything. They could be dressing up as something for Halloween to mock it, or they could be dressing up as something for Halloween to support it. You never really know because it's Halloween. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, for the sake of the absolute greatest level of good faith we can give this, that he dressed up as Donald Trump because he likes Donald Trump. Well, the problem then is, does he still like Donald Trump? We have to, kind of consider that question, because it was 2017. Tyler Robinson is only 22 years old, which means back in 2017, he was still very much a kid. He would have been a young teenager, around 14, 15 years old. And teenagers, as they grow up, as they reach adulthood, well, their beliefs tend to change quite a lot. You may have recalled that for everybody else who is currently an adult and went through your teenage years. That's kind of your formative years. So what someone dressed up as back when they were a kid for Halloween proves very little about what they believe as an adult. It is, as I say, a very big cope. It's reaching, it's straw grasping. It's not really proof of anything. If anything, all it really shows is that he was raised in a conservative family, which we kind of already know, so that doesn't really matter. It's an irrelevant moot point. The only thing that really explains is why he's such a good shot and knows how to use a rifle, despite being an Antifa soy boy. Another weird related cope is people saying that he was a Nazi because he was wearing a Land of the Free shirt with an American flag on it. I mean, that one's so bizarre it just doesn't even need to be refuted. If anything, it's just evidence of the problem with the stochastic terrorist element that we see coming from breadtoids these days. They call everything they don't like Nazi, and in doing so justify violence against normal, ordinary people. In some cases, people who aren't even political. I have seen plenty of apolitical, neutral people who don't care at all and just want to live their life wearing some kind of American flag shirt like this. It proves absolutely nothing, and it certainly has absolutely nothing to do with fascism. 1950s Bad Mustache Man is not an American flag shirt. This is one of those very, very few things that you can refute by just saying, no, are you insane? No. Just no. Which, speaking of which, the next thing to be refuted is people saying that Charlie Kirk was a Nazi, so he deserved it. And I think the problem here is that the people who say this, let's just assume that they actually believe what they're saying. I'd like to refute this from a standpoint of good faith here. The issue is that a lot of people have no idea what fascism actually is. The real history of fascism as an actual unironic political ideology, and not just as a snarl word that politically ignorant people use against anybody they don't like, is that it's considered a third positionist economic model. So it has private business, but it also creates very strict state control of this private business. And so business in the third position is kind of private in name only. It says it's privatized, but it's under so much regulation and state control that effectively the state owns it. And so it's kind of a position in between socialism and capitalism, with a strong command economy emphasis. Kind of like how China actually operates today. That's one of the silly things about China. China today basically mirrors the same policy as the National Socialist Party. They just do it with communist propaganda so that the leftoids in the West don't realize what's going on. Now, of course, the relevant question here is, did Charlie Kirk believe in any of these things? No, he did not. Now, there are, of course, hundreds of posts about what Charlie Kirk said or did, and it would be impossible to go over each and every little thing in a single video without it, being 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours long. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to give you some general quotes from Charlie Kirk to give you an idea of what he believed. He stated things like, free markets are the greatest anti-poverty program ever devised. He's also said things that he's always making the argument for free markets, first principles, and limited government. Specifically saying things like, big government is the enemy of freedom, with one that stood out to me as being, you cannot legislate the poor into freedom by legislating the wealthy out of freedom. The government cannot give to anybody anything that the government does not first take from somebody else. You cannot multiply wealth by dividing it. Or he's also said, the federal government claims the right to regulate everything and also the right to ignore any law, selectively whenever it wants. That's a bureaucratic dictatorship by people who hate you. So, in other words, what Charlie Kirk appears to be to me is more like your general conservative with a few libertarian leanings. Not nearly as far libertarian as I am, but he's definitely at least a little bit more libertarian than he is authoritarian. He's said some theocratic things I don't agree with, But overall, he was a man more on the side of freedom than the opposite, which is definitely not what fascism as an actual political ideology preaches. And so, surprise, surprise, this is just another example of neo-Marxists calling everyone they don't like a Nazi, and then using that to justify violence against normal, ordinary people. A pretty typical brain rot, to be honest. Which, speaking of brain rot, another thing to be refuted fairly quickly, because it's a pretty obvious one, is that yes, there are people who think that because Charlie Kirk was assassinated during a Prove Me Wrong event, then that means he was proven wrong. Yeah, sadly enough, there are some people out there who unironically believe this. And of course, no, it doesn't work that way. Because it's their ideas that matter, and other people can simply copy those ideas and carry them on. That's actually a big reason why assassinations for the sake of ideology don't really work. Not just from an ethics standpoint that murder is a wrong thing that you shouldn't do, but it's also wrong from just a strategy standpoint. All it actually does is just martyr them. It makes people who weren't even aware of Charlie Kirk and what he had to say take a look at him and think to themselves, wow, what this guy was saying must have been so powerful and so impactful that it enraged someone enough to murder him. And then they look up what he said, and a lot of people are going to end up agreeing with him based on that. You can't kill ideas. I mean, you kind of can, but it's very, very difficult to do so. You have to somehow murder everybody who believes it, which in this day and age of the internet is completely impossible. So forget times in the past where it might have been somewhat possible in the event and context of a completely insane genocide. These days, it's definitely impossible. And of course, it doesn't prove him wrong at all. That would just be an ad baculum fallacy. Or at absolute best, just another instance of subjective reality postmodernist nonsense. Very stupid argument. Moving on to something a little bit more interesting, which is this really weird take from Shawn. Yes, that Shawn. This is what he posted on Blue Sky. In the US, conservative mindset, cishet conservative white men are top of the hierarchy, and thus it is bad to shoot them, but also they are allowed to shoot people, so if one kills another, it's just a wash, cancels out, thoughts and prayers, nothing to see here. Now, admittedly, when it comes to Shawn, he's such a midwit that it's almost impossible to tell whether he's being serious or not. But honestly, in this one, I suspect he actually is. Now, if you are right-leaning and a white male in any capacity, such as, well, myself, you probably find this to be a very strange accusation, because we generally don't believe that it's okay to shoot people who are not also white and male. Maybe someone will say that as a joke, but nobody I've actually met unironically believes this. It's only something you might see from very fringe, edgy teenage wignots. Whereas Shawn seems to sincerely believe that this is a common mindset, when it absolutely is not. And so the answer to this puzzle of how the heck Shawn is saying something like this is to remember something very important at social interaction, which is that radically false accusations are usually projection. That's the biggest tell. When someone is making an accusation of how other people think, and that accusation is just completely off the mark, just way out, flying past left field, all the way out of the sky, all the way out to outer space, flying straight into Jupiter, just completely, totally, insanely inaccurate, well, that's because people can only guess how other people are thinking, sometimes based on how they think. And how does Shawn think? Well, Shawn is a stereotypical far-left neo-Marxist nutjob. If you've seen any of his videos, you've probably noticed this. And so one of the nonsense points that he believes in is the progressive stack, which of course is a hierarchy of people being allowed to say certain things based on their identity group and collective guilt level. And so what Shawn's doing here is he's taking the collectivist guilt brain rot that he believes, and he's projecting that onto white men in the United States. And so his logic flow is pretty much, I believe in collective guilt, therefore the people I hate must believe in collective guilt. That's probably how the neurons are firing in his little noggin here. Either that, or he's just engagement baiting by intentionally posting nonsense. Hard to tell with Shawn sometimes. But it's common enough in the progressive stack reasoning, along with the subjective morality and collective guilt that comes with it, for this type of thinking to occur. For example, this post from one of my viewers: we support Palestinians even if their culture is homo/transphobic and misogynist, but Charlie Kirk being ended for it is justified. You know, just kind of pointing out another silly example of the inconsistent way that these people think. And that's why I suspect that Shawn is probably being serious here, which doesn't surprise me because Shawn's ideology is one of those ideologies that you can completely blow out of the water by simply asking them, is Islam right about women? It's one of those brain rot subjectivist ideologies that can be easily defeated in less than 10 seconds. But Anyway, what is the conclusion we can draw from all of these people being wrong about such a horrible event? Well, I'd like to go a bit more into that point I made earlier. Remember that post from Hassanabi and Voosh? America is an insanely violent nation. Charlie Kirk's shooting is the 46th school shooting this year thus far. And remember how that's kind of pedantically correct? Because the answer is yes, there is quite a bit of violence going on. But it's not because of guns, especially in the context of school shootings, as they're trying to imply here. The reason, of course, is something completely different, which is that Western society is becoming increasingly anti-intellectual. And by anti-intellectual, I don't mean it in the way that the cathedral would say it. Academics and journalists of the days would of course define an anti-intellectual as anybody who doesn't agree with them, which ironically is the real problem. True anti-intellectualism has nothing to do with that BS about trusting the experts and believing the science. Rather, the problem that I mean by anti-intellectual is that Western society is becoming stupider and more entitled, filled with a bunch of weak babies who can't handle having their beliefs challenged, to the point where they actually believe that it is justified to murder someone based on having different beliefs than them. With the issue here being that a lot of people don't seem to understand the difference between entitlements and rights. Rights are things like property rights, right to yourself, right to your body, right to the property you own. Things that actually can be defended on an ethical level. But a lot of people think that anything they want is a right, without understanding that if you think that you have a right to something that forces the labor of somebody else, well, that's not really a right because it's infringing on somebody else's rights. You're creating slavery. And so you see a lot of people who think that it's a right to not have to hear other people saying things that they don't agree with, or that they have a right to free stuff or free housing or whatever, or that a right to welfare. And all of these require the labor and work of somebody else. They all require using somebody else's resources in a non-voluntary exchange. And you can't really call that a right because it infringes on somebody else's rights. And a lot of people in the West are losing understanding of this. They are anti-intellectual in a sense that they believe in increasingly insane things like silence is violence, like you're somehow aggressing on someone by not agreeing with them openly. So even to the point where being neutral is somehow violence, and you're there entitled to you agreeing with them at all times. And given all the completely insane and deranged reactions I'm seeing from far-left neo-Marxists again here, we can clearly see just how many of these adult children, effectively, seem to think that they are entitled to a world where everybody accepts them and everybody gives them what they want, all for free, yada yada yada, and they never have to listen to anybody disagreeing with their beliefs. Which is kind of sad because what they really want is freedom of association. They just don't realize it. Because again, Western society is just becoming stupider and more entitled, so nobody actually thinks of a simple solution. If you don't want to listen to what other people say, the correct action is to find and create your own space, and basically physically remove yourself. But instead, people seem to believe that the people they don't like deserve to be banned from everywhere, including life. That's not how you get a consistent understanding of human rights. And Western society unfortunately seems to have lost sight of this. We don't understand the difference between a right and an entitlement, and so naturally people end up thinking that this kind of behavior is acceptable, when it absolutely is not. So in conclusion, Charlie Kirk's assassination is very, very, very unfortunate. But hopefully people will learn the correct lesson from this, which is that this kind of escalation shows the true problem behind what anti-intellectualism actually is. That we need to become less entitled rather than more entitled. And that the actions of Tyler Robinson are not the actions of stopping the evil authoritarian fascist regime from rising. Rather, they were the actions of a deranged man-child who was radicalized by the far left's neo-Marxist rhetoric. And we need to recognize that the answer to this is less anti-intellectualism rather than doubling down on the stupidity. That's pretty much all I have to say on this subject. So thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support my content, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, becoming a member of the channel, or buying some merch from my merch store. But again, I want to highlight that there is a GoFundMe for Charlie Kirk's family. His widow is reportedly devastated, which is understandable. And while a little bit of money their way isn't gonna bring Charlie Kirk back, and even though they're honestly probably already wealthy enough that they don't really need it, the point of it is really just a gesture of kindness. And to show the Marxist psychopaths who are celebrating this event that they haven't actually accomplished anything, aside from once again slipping the mask and showing us who they really are. Again, thanks for watching. That is all. Till next time.